Camera's right behind me. I may be in the way.
Well, I hope it's just not showing it back.
I'm already working on that.
It's always better to have it to hear than to hear.
I don't know what time it is. Do you have time?
It's, 3:30.
Okay. Well, I'll call this meeting of the, American Rescue Plan Steering Committee, to order. And, I will be, making some comments, and I'll turn it over to, Secretary Larry Walther, who I've asked to chair, this steering committee. And then I've asked, to be as vice chair, Secretary Stacey Hurst to my left. And, I want to particularly thank, the legislative, participation here. As you know, I asked, Senator Pro Tem Hickey, as well as the Speaker of the House, to designate 3 from each body for this steering committee. And so you are either willing to work hard, most esteemed members, or gluttons for punishment, depending on how you look at that. But I'm very, very appreciative of our legislative members here, because you give us, early insights. You're part of the process as we develop the investment plans that we have for these funds. And then, as you know, we have a lot more work to do whenever we carry board law. We're going to give you a chair. From here, it will go to the Legislative Council, and you'll have an influence double time here and then also through the Legislative Council. In most instances, I hope that we can all work together and to reach a common agreement. But regardless, we're going to have a good open debate about how this money should be used. I see this as a unique opportunity that comes, very rarely to a state to have this kind of investment opportunity. And it is unique in history. It's a unique opportunity to improve the infrastructure of our state, from broadband to healthcare, from cybersecurity issues to IT to water projects. And if you look at each of you have in front of you the rules. I have my own little booklet here, and you can take those home. You don't need to read them out. Larry will take you through some of those. But there's a lot of guidance that we have from the Department of Treasury on how to spend this money. I made a quick outline of some of the categories, and this just shows you the breadth of the areas that can be considered. Public health response, that would include support for vulnerable populations, enhancement of public health data systems, capital investments, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, payroll for response to COVID-19. That's just under the public health response. So you look at the economic impacts that you can address. That can go from job training to survivor benefits, to small business rebound, to hospitality support, data analysis, and tech infrastructure. That's in the second category. For low-income families, it could be from community violence intervention, homelessness, affordable housing development, educational disparities, child welfare, and foster youth. Those are 3 categories, and then they have categories that does not apply to us here, which is replacing lost public sector revenue. It has premium pay options for essential workers, water and sewer infrastructure, and specifically mentions broadband. And so you can see from the breadth of those options, the responsibility, the debate, and the decision-making that has to be made. What Chairman Walther will talk about is the process as to how we reach decisions, which is important. From my standpoint, you look at $1.5 billion, those are round numbers, that we will have here in the state we have to first recognize that we have counties and cities that are getting money separately and directly. We have different departments of government, from education. Secretary Key has a big wallet over there at the Department of Education. We have Department of Health has some money coming. I know that Secretary Gillespie has a significant amount of money coming through Department of Human Services as well. And so our job is to make sure we coordinate and that we just don't allocate money, for example, to home assistance whenever the cities could be covering that, the counties could be covering that, and we have over $170 million sitting over at DHS to cover assistance. And you go on down the list. There's money out there for utility assistance, rental assistance, mortgage payments, and so we don't want to duplicate that. Remember what all is out there. I want to make a point, and this is to the agency directors, secretaries that are here, and of course it applies to each of you, but we work for the government. We work for the executive branch or the legislative branch, but the private sector has an important voice as we look at how to invest this money for the future. And so I want to utilize the private sector, but we didn't bring them here because, we could have filled, an auditorium if we brought in all of the interested parties. But I'm asking our different departments of government to utilize the private sector, reach out to them, and make them a part of the decision-making. Listen to them, particularly on the long-term investments. So I've already spoken to Secretary Preston that he would utilize our Economic Development Commission. There are already private sector representatives that can give guidance on this, and it's already set in place. We have Parks, Heritage, and Tourism with our Tourism Association. Help me out.
Yeah, the commission.
Yeah, the commission. And so they're already set in place that can help make their comments as well. And you could go on down the list as to the private sector partners that we want to enlist to help shape this. Ag may want to have that kind of influence as well. And so I just encourage you to make sure the private sector is engaged and to utilize them. And as we get different requests that come in, then they will be assigned to vet out, and that part of that vetting process can be our private sector partners. Whenever you look at the breadth of needs and options that we have, I would ask you to break those down, at least I'm breaking them down mentally, into two parts. One would be the immediate needs, and then others long-term needs that we can spend a lot more time developing and debating and considering as to where those investments should be. In terms of the immediate needs that I would like to see quick action on would be broadband investment. That's something that I believe that there's good unity from the legislature on this priority to the executive branch, and we already have the experience of our Rural Connect program that's set up. Our cities and counties are utilizing that. We've put $140 million into it of the original CARES Act funding. So it's all set up, that mechanism, to invest more, and I would rather see our investment in broadband out there within a couple of months versus within a year. There's the urgent need. Now, some will say, well, there's going to be federal money coming. Well, the federal money, they got like 4 years to spend that. Let's get it out there quickly. It's an urgent need for our rural communities. The second area is in the area of vaccination. We are not over the pandemic. We're not over the community spread of the virus. And so we still have to invest. We have to work that. We have to pay attention to it. The most urgent need is vaccinations. And so there very well will be coming to you specific requests for support, for some incentives for vaccination that will help, whether it's the private sector, the public at large, or whether it is the state. And so those requests will be coming in. I know that in June we have, I guess ALC is meeting now, but they'll be meeting again in June, and I would like to see some requests coming from this steering group for the June meeting of some of these urgent needs, these immediate needs that we can invest in. Now, I know Secretary Walker's a little bit nervous about all of that because he's waiting for the trigger. Whenever he asks the Department of Treasury to send money down, they send half of it, right? Yes, sir. Which means a lot of money, $750 million that they would send to us, and then the other would come later. But once we ask for that, that triggers 30 days for our cities and counties that will be having to get that money out to some of those. So then the longer term investments are unlimited options, but there are infrastructure projects that we want to make sure meets within the guidelines of the Department of Treasury, the cybersecurity investments that I have mentioned. It could be the human investments that we need to make in workforce training. We've waited for an opportunity in Arkansas that we can invest significant amounts of money in workforce training that's specifically allowed in these funds. And this is something that to me is a high priority, but we need to make sure we get it right, we develop it in the right way so that it can be invested and have a benefit long-term here in the state of Arkansas for the next generation. And so those are my comments. I trust you all. I know that y'all are going to have a lot of debate on this, and I'll come back as need be, but I really appreciate Larry Walker being chair of this because it's going to take a lot of time and energy, and utilizing the team that he has at DF&A that is going to be very beneficial to this and give us some staff support. Bill Gossage is over in the corner, but he's my deputy chief of staff, and Bill will be my direct liaison here at the steering group, and will be communicating with me regularly as to how this shapes up. So before I turn it over to the chair, are there any questions or comments you want to address to me? I think you all are ready to get to work, and so I'll turn it over to you, Larry, and I know you all got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to leave that with you.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Governor. What I'd like, within the binder that you have in front of you, there's an agenda that we're using for this meeting. What I'd like to do is cover the agenda, the first 4 bullets, and then the discussion. I have some kind of housekeeping things that we'll want to talk about, how we're going to staff and who's going to staff it, and rules, kind of the rules that we want to use as we move through our charge, and that is to distribute $1.5 billion associated with the American Rescue Plan, and get the best we can from the dollars that we've been given in this case. So if you would turn to the first page where it says Arkansas, the first tab, the blue tab, Arkansas Rescue Plan Steering Committee. The state has, I'm on the page with the numbers where it says Arkansas allocation amounts. The state of Arkansas Fiscal Recovery Fund will be $1.573 billion, and that's the amount that we'll be dealing with mostly. There's also a capital fund that's $157.785 million for capital type projects. That money is not available yet. The rules have not been sent out by Treasury. We expect them midsummer on that. But they tend to be, from what I've seen so far, they tend to be associated with infrastructure, more for broadband and things like that. So we'll see how the rules evolve. Then there's the local fiscal recovery fund, and that's the money that goes to the counties, the metropolitan cities, the non-entitlement cities. The counties will receive, in total, $586 million. That number has been determined, and under, I think the pink tab, no, the green one, you'll see by county the amount of money that's available to each of those counties. They will receive that money directly from the Treasury of the United States government. They will have to file through the Treasury portal for that money. There are a few things that they have to do. They're fairly simple. And one of them is to give them the bank account that the money goes to, which I think would be real important. They will have access to half of that money initially, and then at the end of 12 months, the way I read it, after 12 months, they will get the second half of that money. One thing I want to point out early on is their use of the money is the same use that the state has for the money. In other words, they have the same requirements to find projects to utilize this money as the state funds. The metropolitan cities, there's 14 that are 50,000 citizens and above. 14 of those, they will receive $208.8 million, and it'll be the same process. I'll get a little more detail in that in a minute. The non-entitlement cities are those below 50,000 citizens, 216 million. That money will come through the state, and we have some requirement to verify the amount of money that they should be getting. It is the smaller of the amount that they calculate that is available to them, or 75% of their budget that they had in January of 2020, which is pre-COVID. We're going to have to get from each of those cities, and there's pushing 400 of the non-entitlement cities, their budget will have to be submitted to us so that we can verify what 75% of the budget is, so that we can send them the money. So the total local amount for cities and counties is going to be $1 billion. The combined total will be $2.7 billion. So let's turn the page. That $1.57 million that's coming to the state, the idea, the purpose of those funds is to support COVID. I mean, that's every time you see any of the rules and documentation, the first thing has to do with COVID response, decreasing the spread of the virus, bring the pandemic under control, do vaccinations, medical expense testing, contact tracing, things like that. That's number one thing. Obviously, that's where we would rely on Dr. Romero to provide the guidance and the recommendations as it has to do with that. Replace public sector revenue. I don't know if there will be any of that in the cities and counties. The way we budget and balance the budget and revise the budget, we're not going to have any public sector lost revenue, I don't think. Unless it's that PPP, and we'll look at that. That was about $177 million, but we'll look at that. That's about the only thing I can think of that might merit submission. Economic stabilization of households and businesses, systemic public health and economic challenges that have been attributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic. We tried to do some things like in the Delta. I think this is going to provide another chance to make a difference in the Delta area or in the counties and cities of the lower income. That's part of the objective of this money, is to do that. Again, I want to remind everybody, I keep going back to this, the counties are getting money and the cities are getting money. And if you look at your county, there's some significant amount of dollars that are going to these counties. It's gonna be very helpful to do that. And as we discussed the CARES money, I always felt like the people in a smaller town or a town economically challenged would have a better idea of where those dollars needed to be spent than maybe we do. So we'll need their advice. We'll need to know if they have enough money. Do we work with them? We can partner with them, because we have the same objective as we move forward in this. Water, sewer, issues. I'm sure many cities, have issues with water. Counties have issues with water. When I was doing economic development, I had, water funds for water grants, and there were more grants requested than we were able to provide grants to. And so I know there's probably a lot of places where that will be a benefit, not only in smaller towns, but in larger towns too, as the infrastructure gets deteriorated and, you got lead pipes, anything like that would be something that would be looked at in that area. Premium pay for essential workers, prioritize low and moderate income workers facing greater mismatch between employment and related health expense, risk, things like that. So that's kind of an overview of what we're looking at for the state money. The capital projects, again, that's the $57.7 million. I move to the next page. What they are going after in this, as we understand it today, is investments in depreciable assets and auxiliary costs needed to put capital assets in use. High-quality broadband was mentioned specifically, connectivity and infrastructure. So we're waiting to see what the rest of the direction from Treasury is on that. I'm not going to repeat it, but as I mentioned earlier, the counties and the cities, I gave you those numbers, the same requirements that I just visited with you about are the way the money will be, can be spent by the cities and counties. So again, I think one of the things I want to do and my team will want to do, and I'm sure y'all want to do, is to make sure that we don't pay for the same thing twice. I mean, we coordinate our efforts with the cities and counties. Timelines for the funds. This is a going forward. This is a future expenditures, but it's not. It starts on March the 3rd of 21, which isn't that far back. We can't go back until last year, unless it's lost revenue, to determine the need. It's going forward from here. The funds must be committed by December the 31st of 2024, which is 3.5 years, and must be spent, it says committed, but it really must be spent by December the 31st of 2026. Is that right, Alan? Yeah. So that's 5.5 years if this project, yes, Representative Wardlaw.
So you're saying the bullet point number 3, the definition of committed should be spent.
Spent.
So what's the definition of committed in the second line for 2024? Is that spent as well?
We have to make a decision where the money will go.
By that
And then that entity has another 2 years to actually expend the money.
Perfect.
Okay? The next page talks about how one obtains the money. This is, kind of, the process one would go through. You put the name, the tax ID, Dunn's number, that's the Dun and Bradstreet designation, their address, authorizing agent, contact person, their contact information, funds transfer information, complete certificate documented by signing it. The jurisdiction must submit a request to receive funding even if they have previously applied for it. Eligible jurisdiction will receive further communications regarding the status of their submission, whatever. Once they get in the portal, they'll tell them the status of the money. But the money will go directly to the county and the 14 cities when they apply. I do not know if anyone has applied to date. Do you know, Alan? I have not. I haven't asked that question, and I guess I could probably get that from the Cities or County Association, but I have not called to ask. but they could do it today. What I'd like to tell you is, my objective is to apply for the state 1.5 by, the 1st of June, which is about 10 days from now. We have some things we need to do in order to coordinate with the non-entitlement cities so that we get that information that I talked about earlier. We've got to have that so that we know how much they are authorized to receive, and then we are responsible for getting it to them. Once we apply for ours, theirs comes along at the same time, and it'll be a 50% of the amount, which is about $108 million for the non-entitlement cities. The total was 216, I think. The half of that's 108. Okay. The same requirements for the cities and metropolitan counties. You know, it is just the same requirement as we have. So there's not really any need to stop on that page. And then the non-entitlement cities, I think I've already talked to you about it. We have to test their budget. 75% of that budget will be some number, and hopefully that number will be greater than the number that appears in the allowable dollars that any individual city can receive. We had received that list of all the cities. It's I think it's less than 400, but pretty close to it. We had received that number. They pulled it back and have not resubmitted it. Hopefully they'll do that on short order. We know about what it is. It was probably pretty close, but for some reason, they pulled it back and are doing some other calculations.
And that decision made by the feds on
Yes,
what
sir.
to, yeah, that'd be good for us, especially in rural areas where we have so many small
Oh, yeah.
towns.
And Larry, the non-entitlement cities, that's maybe like a city that's 500, is that
Less
correct?
than 50.
Okay,
So, Hot Springs is over 50,000. And that number should be, you should see.
yeah,
Garland
I've
County,
seen what it
Hot Springs
is.
in the list that I gave you. Another town, it's Malvern's not in, Garland, no. What's another?
No,
Beg pardon?
Malvern's in Hot Springs.
What's another town in?
We only have
Yeah, Mountain,
Mountain Pine.
yeah, they'll be on the list.
They will, that's the one that I was thinking about. They've already called.
Yeah, okay. As soon as we get that information, we'll get it to you, we'll get it to the group, but we'll also provide that to the Association of Cities and Counties, you know, the Municipal League and the Association of Counties, so that they can also, well, donate to the counties, but, they can get that to the cities also. And we're gonna be working with them. I will tell you this, as we start getting the budgets, if we find that some of them aren't responding to us, what I'd like to do is to contact the local legislators to help encourage those towns to get that budget to us, because if they don't, there's a possibility they would not receive the appropriation that has been authorized to them. And I would think they at least want to have the opportunity to spend the money. If they don't spend the money, we can always send it back. But, at some point, once it's sent back to the feds, it might be pretty hard to get back. I'd rather not have to do that. Capital projects, again, we know the summer of '21. The last page of the slides that we put together, are linked to additional information. The first one is 151 page, by the way, U.S. Treasury interim final, whatever an interim final is, rule, that was issued on May the 10th. Then there's Treasury frequently asked questions, but I've already made a copy of that, and it's in here. And the state and local guidance, I think there's an overview. The next to last tab is an overview of the act and the bill that we're dealing with. But if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of the rules, again, the first link is to the rules that Treasury put out on May the 10th. What I'd like to do now is, talk about some of just the processes that I think we ought to consider. When we did the CARES Act, we came up with a set of rules under which we would operate. It had a lot to do with, for instance, we had the hotels and motels and restaurants who were, you know, they were in pretty dire financial stress. Secretary Hurst took on that responsibility to work with that industry and develop a plan to help provide assistance to them. We worked with her, but she did all the heavy lifting. We provided assistance to the hotels here in Arkansas, and I've had a lot of very positive feedback. I know several of the owners here in Arkansas, and they couldn't have been happier, couldn't be more appreciative of the work that Secretary Hurst did and the money from the CARES Act. What I'd like to do is take those rules and revise those reflecting this act. They'll be similar, but not the same. And then what I'm thinking about doing is just redlining the old act, the old rules, provide that to you so you can see what it was and then what we're suggesting it be changed to. We accept any comments, any thing that you think needs to be rethought or added to or taken out. We'd be more than happy to address those. And we'll get those out to you probably, if not by Friday, early next week. So and you'll see kind of the rules that we went. But the idea that, and the governor mentioned this, when someone comes to us looking for assistance, we would assign that to the most logical state agent in the State Department that deals with those issues, and let them do the research. They're the ones most familiar with with who's coming to them and what their issues are, and then connecting that back to the steering committee so that we can address their issues, and then that secretary would then present the request to the steering committee and with the documentation that would be appropriate for that request. So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about that would go. With regard to staffing, under CARES, we hired a consultant, a local consultant called CTEC, which is over in Maumelle, and they partnered with a company called Haggerty out of Washington, D.C., who their lead man is a former director, the top administrator of FEMA, and they provided invaluable assistance to us. I'm sure, I know Stacy worked with them, your people did, and they helped us design. They're also a tech company that does, the high-tech programming and things like that. So they helped us with developing programs that were used as portals here in Arkansas to get information. We want to do that with the cities. We want the cities to be able to come to an Arkansas portal and provide the budget and then monitor it, just like we're going to be doing with the feds. So we would like to re-engage CTEC and modify the contract so that we can continue to use them throughout the next couple of years. There are these funds also are available for administrative expenses, so we can pay for their expense out of the funds that the $1.5 million. We've talked about funding availability. Okay, so along with CTEC, my team, Alan McVeigh, Paul Lothian and his team from the accounting side, we plan on being the staffing for this committee, the steering committee, provide whatever is necessary, whatever you need, get the job done, to understand what we're trying to accomplish, and to make the decisions on where the money will be, allocated. So, we stand ready to help you on any of that. There will be appropriations required. The way, there was the appropriation bill added, 3 sections dealing with, the American Rescue Act, and it requires us to seek appropriation for any of the money that the state is using, and you know, and get the appropriation so that we can then spend the money. Now, the money that goes directly to the cities and counties, the entitlement cities, doesn't come through the state office, so it will not be, there will not be any appropriation required for those dollars. However, the money that comes to the I lost it. Entitlement. I do that sometimes. The non-entitlement cities we'll have to ask for appropriation for that, because it will come through us, and then we'll send it out. And that, we can't spend money without an appropriation, so we'll be doing that. I think we'll probably ask for some money, some amount, Friday, so that we can, because we're still in, we only have one more month in 21, so we'll need some money in 21 if Mr. Preston wants to move forward very quickly on a project, a broadband project. But that's when, then we'll ask for additional money for 22, probably in June, of the June ALC. But we'll bring all the documentation that we'll need for that. So, okay. Do you have any questions? I've kind of talked about a lot of stuff, and you know, there are links to additional information to give you more background if you desire to do that. There are a lot of unanswered questions. There are a lot of things that have gone through my mind, the governor's mind, and I'm sure yours too, that we don't really know today whether they merit money from the American Rescue Plan. I keep reading that they're giving a lot of discretion to the states and to the cities and the counties, but at the end, there will be accounting for the money that's spent. Records must be maintained, and when you read the questions and answers that they had, you know, typical questions and answers, it's one of the things I've attached here. There will be 2 or 3 on that one issue about the accountability of it. So, you know, the money will be spent, and then we'll have to account for it. It'll be, I'm sure, legislative audit will be looking at it, as well as federal audits will be done on this at some point in the future. So we got to remember that we are responsible for the proper use of the money. Any questions for me?
I have a question about the consultant. So when we did the business interruption grant, you all already had the contract with CTEC Hagerty.
Mm-hmm.
And we added to that, I believe, there was an addendum to that, and then we went and got additional appropriation for that. Are you envisioning that we'll essentially have them under contract for all grant programs that are operated for the ARP, and we'll be able to add appropriation as needed, or how are you envisioning that working?
I haven't envisioned that.
Okay.
I appreciate that question. We will take that, to the extent we can. I think it would be better to expand, to get as large an umbrella as we can, so that you don't have to duplicate or have to go somewhere else to get assistance to do those things. So we can do that, make arrangements for that up front.
Well, I can say that we talked to Mike and his team, and we talked to Wes, and using the consultant like we did was the only way our department could have executed it, because It's unbelievable how many items you have to deal with.
And they're good.
And they're good, and they're very good, and they were able to manage it and produce a report, audit. I mean, it's just a very professional way to approach it.
And
So I'm a big fan
Thank
of doing it that way.
And I like, again, it's a local company. It came out of UAMS. The 4 or 5 men that started it, came out of UAMS to do it. So it's a homegrown business. Okay, anybody else? Good question, thank you. I didn't mean to ignore, Secretary Preston. There was a lot of work that went on in commerce, similar to what, Secretary Hurst did, working with businesses, providing business interruption grants and loans. And it was, I can't say enough about the secretaries and the work they did, trying to meet and understand and then react and deal with the issues that so many businesses had in that period of time last year. It was, and they were hurting. And we even got into, Secretary Preston and I got into some nonprofits that were servicing, clients, with disabilities and they basically shut down and they almost lost their businesses. But we were able to come in and give them just enough to keep them going, and now they're back, working. And, again, there's a tremendous number of just excellent things that happened, by the state, the state of Arkansas in order to address, really critical needs. I appreciate everything y'all did. You too.
It's been a little busy.
And Sydney Gillespie, Secretary Gillespie's not here, but, there were some heavy lifts out there.
I have another question, and I think this is gonna require some research, but we're connectivity in our state parks. And, so I'm very interested in knowing if we can utilize this money for state agency infrastructure. Question, Alan, that I had asked earlier, but our tab is about, our prediction is that we need to spend about $5 million, which is not a huge amount of money, but if we could use this money, it would sure help.
Do you have an internet service provider you would partner with, or are you talking?
Different providers
Okay.
all over the state.
And it might just be, if it's allowable under the rules from Treasury, we might just have to amend the Rural Connect program rules to account for that, which we'll have to do anyway to account for the new guidance from Treasury, because it's different from the original funds. But, I mean, it would make all the sense to me to.
Speak personally from my district, in that, your state park, Village Creek, doesn't even have cell phone service.
Yeah.
And it's a real
Mhm.
health issue problem with people getting lost, getting hurt out there. But
Well, and the highway department is doing that already, and maybe we ought to talk to Lori at some point, but they're already putting fiber to all of their maintenance shops. And we were able to, at Fordyce, to piggyback on that extension line with the Arkansas Connect grant to go a few more miles down Highway 8. So I know they're already doing some of what, Secretary Hurst is mentioning. They're putting fiber to all of their, maintenance shops.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know that that's a problem. I think that's actually probably a good way to expand this in some sense, because getting it to all those parks, you're gonna catch those people, because you're only gonna need one fiber, and you're talking about how many fibers in a pipe
Mhm.
that could be used for other purposes
Right.
in that distance span.
We'll touch base, but they are not.
Yeah.
Secretary Hurst, there's also, as you were describing your question, we're going to be using some of this money for, cybersecurity. But that is a issue with the state issue. We'll be purchasing, obviously, but cybersecurity is just a difficult situation right now. We've all heard about what happened to the pipeline company that had to pay, how many million dollars? It's a big number.
They paid $5 million.
I thought it was more than that. But we need to have this, our systems securely. So I think we'll be using some money to do that also. So I would think that just because it's a state entity doesn't disqualify you from the money. I think it has to do with the use, and broadband is one of the top uses. That and obviously the direct COVID issues.
With the water and sewer projects, well, I wonder if that's gonna include levees. Because in my district in particular, with all the historic flooding we have on a continual basis, levee issues are huge, as Wes knows. We're due for another historic flood, and so.
Secretary Cook and I have already discussed that issue this afternoon, so she got here, that's something we need to look at. She was the chairman of that levee task force 2 years ago that I was a member of. And a lot of good work was done, but there was a lot of work still to be done that hasn't been funded.
Already had 2 mayors call me and ask about, paving streets on infrastructure with water and sewer. They're gonna allow street paving. They wanna use their own money. They're not asking for this.
I don't know the answer to that.
I understand, but if we get, that's something that needs to be considered if we have that discretion.
That issue is addressed in the frequently asked questions. There's a number of entities that have talked about, specifically asking about roads. Right now, they've got a very narrow, interpretation of infrastructure. It's currently those three roads. It may be expanded, as we saw with the CARES, guidance, it's evolved over time, so there may be additional.
There's another bill, and it was in the paper this week, that they're considering for infrastructure, highways and things like that, so we'll see. It may cover that.
Larry, on the point of coordination, one of the issues you brought up, you've got, the metropolitan cities where they're gonna get their money directly. So no appropriation required, the others will have to go through the appropriation process. Similar situation in education. You've got the HERE money that's part of American Rescue, that those funds are gonna go directly to T5 accounts for the institutions. But you have public institutions and you have private institutions. And so there probably needs to be some discussion of how that's going to be coordinated, because if we have to follow the special language, we don't appropriate funds for private institutions. So I think every one of y'all have an institution that this is gonna be impacting, Pine Bluff, and Black River, your area.
Secretary, well, I've talked to Paul Lothian about that, and we've got, I think we need to meet with Senator Hickey and others to talk about that, how wide, how wide or detailed that would be.
Right.
And the other thing is, the money that you're getting directly, you're gonna have to, we'll have to file for appropriation to spend that money.
Oh, this isn't AD, and this is.
You're just talking about
I'm talking about money.
Institutions.
Institutions get, we're well aware of how we're gonna have to do ours, but it's unique because you even have, like Barber colleges that are on the list to get, funding.
And they're coming through you.
So that's.
No, they're coming through me. Well, then if they come through him, he'll have to get appropriation. Unless it goes to some unusual account that doesn't have a money. There aren't many of those that I know of.
All of his doing an awesome job. All of his people.
Any other questions? Okay. Next meeting. What I would like to say about the next meeting would be, it depends on a couple of things. I think you would be interested in our request for funds, which we're looking at, 1st of June. Also, if one of the secretaries, one of the departments within the state has something that they want to bring before the committee, I would be inclined to call the meeting to get that before this committee. And we also need to be looking at getting information before us and moving it toward the legislature, because everything we do is gonna have to be approved through ALC. The next ALC is Friday, so little or no chance to do anything there. The next one will be in June, and I don't think I've seen the June date, but.
Usually the third week of the
So
month.
it's always the third.
Always third week of the
The
month.
18th.
And I think the 4th of June is sort of the date by which we like to get it over to, BLR.
This will have to go to peer before it goes to the ALC.
Yeah, I'm just saying that the end result, peer will meet 2 days before, and, that's the part, but the key date is the 4th of June in order to have it prepared for those dates in that third week.
You actually have a few more days than the 4th. I would use the 9th. The rules are 10 days prior to council date.
We try to get it to you in plenty of time.
We like to hear that.
Very seldom do we have that.
I don't know that practice is there, but I like to hear it.
So do we need to meet before the 4th, is that what you're?
We may.
Yeah.
It'll depend on y'all.
The ninth,
The 9th is the rules.
the ninth,
Okay.
so before the ninth would be,
Okay.
because you still need to work out that percentage and when it's gonna be drawn down.
We want to try to meet on that Wednesday, the 2nd. Would that be plenty of time, or?
I'm looking at this, Secretary Preston
1 to 2 weeks.
and
Yeah,
Secretary Hurd.
I think we
don't
can
know,
do that.
You're not ready, are you?
I won't be ready.
I think we should be ready by then, though.
Okay. The
Unless
good thing,
you want ours to fold into yours, or state parks request. But I don't know if, for sure, that state agencies can use that.
Well, I think we need to get this in place first, and then amend, that should be an easy question to answer, and then it'll be amending the rules, which we'll have to do at some point anyway, because it has to reflect what the new guidance is on treasury, so we can just amend the ARC rules to include that, but this would be to get the funds flowing, because we have a backlog right now of projects that would fit,
and no funding to do it.
and no funding to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's in the frequently asked questions, but, I've read somewhere in the last 2 or 3 days that the CARES Act projects are, for the most part, gonna be acceptable under the American Rescue Plan. I think that, and in this case, obviously it is. And Secretary Preston and his team have a system, a process they put together and have been evaluating the needs. And so he's really on go to do something with regard to the American Rescue Plan, more than
I would
anybody
concur
else.
with Representative Wardlaw that the second is the next meeting for us.
Say that again.
I would concur with Representative Wardlaw that June second would be a good date for us to
Okay,
begin
all right.
to.
Then why don't, if y'all are okay with that, then we'll plan on meeting on June the 2nd. And, we'll expect something prior to June the 2nd from Secretary Preston.
We'll get to work on it.
About the same time, June the 2nd.
3:30.
Yeah, is this time good for y'all? Yeah. 3:30? All right, good.
And we'll have Zoom option available to us, I suppose, if we're not able to wrong. Okay.
Well, I appreciate y'all being here. I understand, Senator Ingram is on the line. He has been quiet, for sure, which is unusual for him. But I appreciate everybody participating, and we look forward to working with you all as we deal with these issues. If there's nothing else to come before this committee, then I would, stand adjourned. Good to see you again.
John,
June 4th is a deadline for peer.
Mike, can I?
It's not a deadline.
You'll have to change the
Rules for council, but it is a deadline for peer.
Leftover funds.
One of you, dropped now.
They did. Oh, it's amazing.
No, whenever you got